if you want to prepare your earphones and your language systems to be able to listen to his presentation just a bit later. We now move on to session 3, supporting improved national identity management practices, and this is where every year now we go into dissecting a flight, and we begin with phase 1 of this travel pattern or travel journey with the evidence of identity and trusted documents. And to lead us into this and to lead our panel into this discussion, we're very happy to have back with us again this year Tony Dean. He is a member of the ICAO Implementation and Capacity Building Working Group. So again, in the essence of time, Tony, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Denis. Okay, as we've just heard, we're now into the third session this afternoon, so supporting improved national identity management practices. We're going to have 4 interesting presentations detailing how a state, in this case Argentina, has tackled this issue by moving in the direction of digital identity. We will also hear of the work being undertaken by one of ICAO's working groups to highlight best practices in the realms of evidence of identity. And we will also hear from 2 NGOs how they have sought to introduce compliance to machine-readable travel document standards for emergency and refugee and stateless person documents. So I think we've got a very varied session this afternoon. I'd like to introduce the first speaker. This is the speaker that Denis has just told us will be speaking in Spanish, so please have your headsets ready. So I'd like to introduce Flavio Ramon Brocca. Flavio is a director within the Ministry of Argentina, Ministry of Interior of Argentina, sorry. He's been involved in this work from February 2016. Prior to that, he was within the information management in the interior and transportation. And some of the projects he's been involved with, he was the project leader of the new ID and the new passport project. He's worked for the design of workflow for offices in the factory for the production of the ID and the passport, commissioned the NEC AFIS system for the automatic identification of persons, and within that they enrolled up to 29 million citizens. So certainly somebody that's very well qualified to talk about digitization of identity projects. So I'd like to hand over the floor to Flavio.
Good afternoon. I'm Flavio Brocca, and I'm going to attempt in my presentation to bring together a number of concepts that we have looked at and bring it all down to earth and show you what we're doing in Argentina. The first thing I'd like to tell you is that we're going to be talking about the concept of identity management. That is the first concept that I want to go in depth on. Could we have the presentation, please?
Bien.
I'm going to spend a couple of minutes telling you about our experience in Argentina, which began in 2009 up to today. As you can see in the screen, since 1968 up until 2009 in Argentina, we had a handwritten document, identity document on paper that didn't expire, and the photo was glued onto the page. And I think a lot of other countries have had this document at some point in their history. And the first thing we did was to create a regulatory framework to achieve digitalization of the document and all the processes of identity management, and that was the first step. As you can see, from 2009 to 2013, there were two important processes that were embarked on. The first was digitalization of the processes, and then digitalization of identity. What we did was to take the database of citizens and turn it into a biometric database with AFIS. And we have just one identity database for the entire country, which produces two documents, the passport, the travel document, and the DNI, which is the national ID card. So there's one source that yields two documents. And this confers an advantage in terms of identity management, and it confers the necessary framework for digitalization. One fundamental point is that in 2017, you can see the green document has a red X over it, and that was the year that that document expired in Argentina. It was no longer valid. And now all identity cards in Argentina are digitalized. You can also see that from 2013 to 2015, we introduced the electronic passport. And at that time, the police issued passports. So we transferred all the document issuance to the Interior Ministry. And the next steps were as follows. Once we had the consolidated database, we began providing identity verification services, and I'm going to explain that to you now. There were two experiences we had in this field. So what does Argentina do for identity verification? The economy is becoming increasingly digital, and people want to do transactions and buy things over phone or online, and they have to be, the transactions have to be verified and make sure that the person who's making the purchase is who they say they are. So in Argentina, we have a management model that is meant to be economically sustainable. We developed an application. It asks a question and gets a response. The application has to determine whether it's a public or private entity asking for the transaction. Here you see a lady wearing red at the counter, and these are the two main people involved, the citizen and the assistant at the shop or entity that has to confirm the identity. And the picture on the left, this is an in-person identity verification, and on the right you see remote identity verification. So the person is working with a kiosk, and there isn't a physical person there to see if they are who they say they are. The Argentinian identification model is intended, the main user is the entity and not so much the citizen. The citizen needs to prove their identity to the entity involved in the transaction. And this model is used especially in the banking sector. If you want to open an account online or pick up a credit card, this is the application that is used. Now we have laws on the screen that you see. The main aim is to protect the citizen, because the personal data protection law of Argentina stipulates that. So the person using the service has to consent to their identity being used in the system. Under Argentinian law, a person's face is seen as sensitive data, and that means that you can get in people's private lives, for example, religion, gender, and ethnicity. All that information is considered to be private, and so consent has to be given. the entity using this service, whether it's public or private, is governed by a standard and an obligation to ask the individual for consent. So we have the citizen on one hand, and then on the other hand you have the entity, public or private, and there's a third party, which is the national government, namely the Interior Ministry. They're up at the top in the screen. So all of this is properly governed by law. So that is the concept of digital identity that we have in Argentina. A person can be identified biometrically, by facial recognition or fingerprinting. And an entity can determine whether the person is who they say they are. So how do we do that? On the basis of what I showed you in screen 1 over all of the years. We've been developing this system, and now we have the right platform to be able to carry this out. Now let's look at this case. I'm going to show you an instance in which a person can be identified remotely, and an instance where they can be identified person to person offline. In this case, we have a screenshot of a mobile phone, and you can see the app being used. In the last screen, I said that the model is supposed to be economically sustainable. The Interior Minister doesn't develop the applications. This is a cell phone application, and it's not internal to the ministry. We let the private sector take care of that because we think it will make the application better. The government focuses on checking identity verification and management. The private sector entities develop the applications. In this case, I'm going to show you with illustrations how this all works on the basis of synergy. The government provides the service and the private sector develops the application. So the application has to connect to the person asking to be verified, and the first step is the reading of a code. So what happens? In this picture, you see a person making faces, if you can see the detail. And this is a service called Proof of Life. If somebody's looking at a cell phone or a PC camera and they have to prove their identity, we have to know that they're actually alive. It's not just a photo. We can't just rely on somebody's two-dimensional picture. We have to ask the individual in front of the screen to move around and make faces to prove that they are actually alive. And in this case, you can see what the person's doing. And when the person does what the application asks them to, then they are positively verified. And so we know the person is who they say. So that is one example of how the platform can be used. Now, this is an offline example. The applications normally need an internet connection, but if you're somewhere where you don't have a signal, then you can't get it verified. So what are we doing to solve that problem? We put the identity into a cell phone with credentials, physical credentials, and two people can do the verification via Bluetooth. I don't have time to show the whole procedure to you, but there are two important things. I have just 30 seconds, and I'll show you without the details of the picture. For a person to check whether a document is valid, they can ask another person to connect to their cell phone, and the other person agrees and shares the information with the first cell phone. And a person might share their photo, their age, their address, or whatever information is required. So we have two options for verification in these applications, a remote solution and an offline solution. So to conclude, we pursued digital verification, and we created a standard whereby all citizens and foreign residents have to be in the database. And from there, we explored the different verification tools for both the public and private entities. And it is working well. So we just wanted to share our experience with you in other countries, and I'm very grateful to the organization for allowing me to once again tell you what's happening in Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Flavio, for a very informative presentation, and thanks for keeping us to time as well. I think that it was fascinating for me to see a situation here where you've got a state that's digitizing the citizen database, but looking to do something that's for the benefit of the state, for the citizen and for private entities as well, and just making it a very functional, usable system for people. So moving on to our next presentation. Our next presenter is Sanjay Dharwadker. Sanjay is currently the head of Global ID Consultancy at WCC in the Netherlands. He has over 30 years experience in identity and identification across many continents, across Asia, Africa, Europe, etc. His current focus areas are civil registration, evidence of identity, electronic travel authorization, policy, social footprints, biometrics and biographies, especially within the EU. But he also works with the World Bank and certainly within ICAO, where I work very closely with him on the ICBWG. He's also a member of ISO and the CEN European Technical Committee for Standardization on these subjects as well. But he's also worked for UNICEF as well as the World Bank program. So let me hand you over now to Sanjay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom, for that, Tony, for that wonderful introduction. I have some good news and bad news for you. I had a total of 18 slides in my presentation, out of which 17 and a half have already been discussed during the previous sessions. So I have to use all my 12 minutes on about half of my slides, so please pay attention. But before that, to start off, I mean, the various references, right from the morning you've seen the references being made to evidence of identity, and I'd just like to highlight some of them. Of course, before that, I would like to just spend 10 seconds to say that all this comes from Barry's work. You know, we just follow in his footsteps. We keep on doing what he advises us to do. And he was able to visualize the importance of evidence of identity years back when this topic looked very, very abstract. I must also thank Simon for having brought out the importance of evidence of identity and documents so well today morning. I have some of the answers to what you made look so complicated. Narjes, thanks for explaining very well TRIP and the 5 elements, so I don't have to, so that cut out about 5 of my slides, so thanks for that. And Sylvain for having provoked us into asking what is basic identity. And lastly, to Emperor Technologies for inspiring us to ask some very important questions and tell us how to find answers to them. So with that, now I'll start my presentation. So this is what has already been explained. We start with the Chicago Convention, the Annex 9, which makes it important for us to discuss some of the things which we will in this presentation. The trip strategy and the 5 elements. What I would like to point out is much of this work is done by the New Technologies Working Group and the ICBWG, which is further backed by the ISO working groups. And I can assure you that a lot of work on evidence of identity is being done within these groups. Few years back, in a 2-day working group session, I used to get about 30 seconds to talk about evidence of identity. Now I get about 5 times that time. I get about 2.5 minutes to talk about evidence of identity. So I think that's a good progress. So these are the 5 elements. You have already seen this diagram, and evidence of identity is one of them. As already again has been explained earlier, the other elements of the trip strategy have been developed and a lot of processes have been built around it. Evidence of identity does remain an important point, and sometimes you feel that it's not been addressed enough. And that is where I come in. This is my half slide, which is the important one. So why is EOI important, and why is it challenging? So what has happened is, because the e-passport and the passport documents have become so secure, lot of the fraud which arises today in travel documents has shifted to evidence of identity. In brief, or to put it bluntly, somebody will come with a fraudulent birth certificate and try to get a original travel document. And that is what makes it vulnerable. But on the other hand, the subject is very vast. EOI is evidence of identity is a very broad subject. It involves legal aspects, human rights, policy, administration, and technology. It is scattered and usually not found under a single department or under a single administrative control. It is impacted by history, geography, war, and culture. We often, when we go back, why does a country have a particular system for establishing evidence of identity? It might go back to its colonial roots, or it might go back to, what kind of the political structure in the country. So all that affects how identity is established in the country. It is a powerful state instrument. It is often politically contested, and I don't need to give examples, but even today you find that large groups often come on the brink of the situation of whether they belong to a country or not. I think Caroline and others will talk about it a bit more in depth, and all that gets related to this particular topic. So it is a multidisciplinary topic, and therefore a fairly wide effort is required to strengthen this particular topic. How does EOI work? It's founded in, the laws and practices and even the constitution of the country. These are the words which are used, citizens, nationals, residents, refugees, the stateless people, how the identities for each one of them have to be addressed. So all this is often closely linked to the civil registration process in the country, and therefore you come to what you would call the breeder documents, and it's not only the birth certificate but often the death certificate, marriage and separation, adoption, naturalization, even name change. For example, a passport might bear a particular name, a birth certificate is another name. There is a process of establishing why the name has changed. So all this becomes important. There can be hundreds of reasons why you might not want to issue a travel document to a person who has valid reasons, but at the same time you have to remember that the freedom of movement, the freedom to travel is a fundamental right, and it's part of, let's say, just one example, it's part of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13. So what are the pitfalls, or what starts worrying you in EOI is, for example, these questions: is a birth certificate genuine? You find differences in names, so is that, are the two names the same? Do the supporting records add up? issues like this. Could this document be forged? Am I taking adequate precautions and not issuing a document to a wrong person? At the same time, am I being sensitive to humanitarian requirements? So all this becomes important to us. But don't worry, as ICAO has a solution for all these complex problems. And in May 2018, the Guide to Evidence of Identity was released. I've given the URL where it can be found. I would say it's a document, again, I think Barry has a lot to do with initiating this particular document. So it is now available. But what I would say is that you should take it as a stepping stone, as the first step, and perhaps a lot more material has to be built around this. Don't worry if you can't read the content of these slides. This is just to show that there is a lot of content in the particular document. So when you get the printout, you can always read it. But what is important to see here is that it shows the three principles of how evidence of identity is established, that an identity is genuine, it links to an individual and the individual uses that. And then there are the various, the principles or the objectives, how all this can be achieved. So what I would just like to highlight, as I have shown some of the bullets, the biometrics is there to authenticate the physical identity, but often the question comes of the legal identity of that person. So there you might require more information, so which often might lie in the biographics of the document. So you need robust breeder documents, you need the social footprint. There is no silver bullet, no single solution. Countries often combine a lot of these things to find a good solution to how to establish the evidence of identity. All this gets linked to new laws and amendments, new concepts are coming up. The importance of privacy has become paramount, so these have to be factored in. And an important point here, that there is an increased engagement with digital identity and online data access. So this is one of the answers to the Simon's problem. Yes, that you can strengthen the paper documents, but also now alternative processes are available where, say, the data, say the birth record can be directly accessed or directly queried to a secure database. So you can eliminate the, the insecure papers going around in the system. And all this, we says that at some stage will lead to new SARPs from ICAO. This is further details of, say, for example, identity exists, you can go to the civil registration records. Identity is living, you can look up the death certificate that, the person is not yet dead, etc. So these are just ways, specific examples, concrete examples given of how the various objectives can be met. So I'll not read that out. And therefore, now the EOI has a whole ecosystem. So there are the core identity attributes like name, date of birth, parents' names, biometrics, etc. But there is also the additional data which you can refer to. I mean, even a passport in many countries is a document which you refer to, or it can be your health records, or it can be the voter records which you refer to, etc. And then there is always, I'm sure all of you are familiar with processes like, okay, can you show me your salary certificates, or can you show me your bank records? All these, this is what we call the social footprint, which also establishes that a person is part of a country's system. And this, as I call, is the complicated document, complicated chart, which shows that if we have to put all this together, so it could be the civil registration, the functional registers like voters and healthcare, the foundational ID systems which might have your biometrics, and you should be able to progressively put this together and use it for establishing the evidence of identity of individuals. This is what I put together as, let's say, the summarization. That is, it's you have to show that an identity exists, the presenter links to the identity, the presenter uses the identity, and this can be established by using biometrics, biographics, and the social footprint. And this, whatever solution each country finds, it will perhaps lie in this kind of a model. All various organizations are working on this already, and one of the, you can see OSCE, where I worked closely with Simon's team on the compendium on evidence of identity, and the second last line, which is the CENTEC, which is the EU standardization group on breeder documents. This is actually going in two directions, so I thought I'll give that example. One is standardizing a fully digital model, which can be the model for tomorrow, and on the other hand, also strengthen the form and the security features of the paper breeder document. So both of these are being worked on. So that's really it. Each country needs to, or each state needs to review their existing EOI processes. The legal framework becomes important here. It's not just technology, but it's also the legal framework. And also look at it in totality, which means the border control guidelines which have been released by ICAO. There are a lot of important points there which needs to be looked at, etc. So that's really it, and I would like to conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Sanjay is one of those people that's a moderator's nightmare. He turns up with a presentation of about 36 slides and then goes on to say, but I don't need 33 of them. No, really thorough presentation on a very, very difficult topic. But as you can probably see, evidence of identity's moved on. Many years ago, evidence of identity was just a birth certificate. It was just a record somewhere. But as Sanjay says, it's a very difficult topic now. There is no silver bullet, but it's very much an end-to-end process. It's not just about does this record exist. It's about, does this person really link to this identity? And I can't recommend enough the ICAO guide that Sanjay was one of the leading players in bringing this together. So please do follow the link in his presentation and have a look at that document. Okay, so moving on, as I said, we'd have a couple of presentations from NGOs about how they handle the topic of identity documentation. So we're moving on now to Pierre Gentile. He's been working for the International Committee of the Red Cross since '96. He spent more than 10 years in the field in the Balkans, in Afghanistan, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. For 2007 to 12, he managed the protection of the civilian population unit within the protection division at the ICRC headquarters in Geneva. And from 2012 to 14, he managed the project Healthcare in Danger at the Direction of Operations. He has since been appointed the head of division and protection of Central Tracing Agency in the ICRC. But today he's going to be talking to us about a particular document that they use for refugees. So let me hand over to Pierre. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Since its first participation in this symposium in 2012, the ICRC has endeavored to revise the travel document that we were using for decades based on ICAO standards to ensure the future of this humanitarian service. I feel very privileged today to be in front of you to precisely present where we are. And oops, can I have the presentation uploaded? To present this new travel document. And maybe the first thing that we should say is that as ICRC, our work is to try, of course, to alleviate the suffering of the people the most vulnerable in situations of conflict and violence. Hence, we are speaking of people that do not necessarily have everything that you mentioned, a bank account, a home address, etc., etc., etc. And this, of course, makes things slightly more difficult. So in the corridor, the leave no one behind in terms of states, leave no states behind, but you have to remember that here we speak of people, and the leave no one behind is about people. It's really about making sure that people can indeed travel, can indeed live their life as normal as possible. The reason why we have those travel documents for the ICRC, it's linked historically to return of prisoners of war, to people who have been forcibly displaced in conflict, going back at the end of the conflict, people who lost their document. Today, it's still used in many different types of cases for humanitarian reason. What I must say, it's always done so when the country of departure and the country of arrival agree. They are the one, of course, who are the key to these travels. The legal basis that we have is rooted in the Geneva Convention, and from there we have developed a long-term practice. You can see that since the Second World War, it's more than 600,000 emergency travel documents that were issued. Over the last 10 years, 38,000 were issued, and in 2018, to take this year, so far we are a bit more than 2,000 travel documents. The numbers do vary. They can go from 2,000 to 6,000 a year, depending, of course, of world events and requests. In view of complying with ICAO requirement, the ICRC worked closely in the past few years with the subgroup on new technology. The working group finalized the ICAO guidance emergency travel document in May 2016, and in this guidance document you will find that the ICRC emergency travel document is explicitly mentioned. It is recommended that humanitarian organizations are encouraged to comply with the general principle and to improve standards and security of their document. This is precisely what we have done since then. Let me also mention that in terms of our presence today, we are present in more than 80 countries who are affected by armed conflict or other form of violence, or were affected and we still work in the aftermath, and in different emergency situations. We work very closely with the affected population and with the authority alike. For us, what's important with this emergency travel document is the rigorous process of enrollment, issuance, and data management. The data management is centralized in a unique database in Geneva and is clearly secured. At the same time, we maintain very close collaboration with embassies, consulate, with UNHCR, with IOM, and other actors in the determination of these travel documents. We work nevertheless in very specific circumstances, sometimes in very chaotic environment where infrastructure is not always available, including in some extreme cases, no electricity. One of our challenges was to find a document that complies with ICAO principle, but at the same time can be arranged, can be delivered in those very difficult circumstances. The document is not machine readable. It's not a passport, it's not an ID card. It's a single journey document. And this makes it very different. That's also why we didn't want it to look like a passport or to look like an ID document. It really looks like an emergency travel document. So it may surprise people at the border because they are not accustomed to it, but somehow we felt it was better than to have a document that pretends to be what it's not, a passport and ID card. Historically, the document was a document which had low feature in terms of security. We have clearly upgraded it to a document which has more security feature. First, it incorporates a variety of security feature in the impression. It has a clear serial number that is managed ex our headquarters in Geneva. And very clearly, it is also mentioned that it is a single journey. There is a section where you have the description of the travel itinerary that the person is going to take. So it's very clear when you have the document that this is for one travel and this is the exact travel on that date that the person is supposed to take. The photo is digitally printed, and there is, of course, signature and fingerprint of the person. There is also a place for the intra-visa. As mentioned, it is done when it's upon request of state, the one of departure and the one of arrival. So, of course, this means that all the visas are having been obtained before issuing the document. And there is, of course, the stamp, the ICRC stamp on it. All those documents are recorded in a single database, as I mentioned. It is done in a way which is easily readable. So it's a document that anyone can understand very easily in terms of its content. What we hope is that this revised document will be today accepted by states in, of course, place of departure, place of arrival, which is usually the case, as I mentioned, is when the two have agreed upon a travel of a single individual that we issue the document, but also in country where the people might transit and might go through, because this is, of course, the key issue. Once the two countries, the departure and the arrival, have agreed, usually the person nevertheless has to transit through different states that have to accept this travel document. We will, in the coming days and weeks, through our delegation, contact most authorities to present this new travel document. It will enter into vigor for us as of next year. So as of January next year, this will replace the actual document that is being used now for the last 2 decades. Hence, from now till January, we will take contact with most of your government. I left a few brochures at the entry in different languages. You have them on the table at the entrance on the right when you go out. That explain and showcase the specimen of this travel document. And I'd be grateful if, of course, you can also pass this information into your different services to who it may concern. Once more, this is low number. It will probably stay between 2,000 to 6,000 a year. Over the last decade, that's where it was maintained. But it's a crucial document to allow people who have been detained in conflict to go back, prisoner of war, or simply people detained from another country to go back. It allows refugees in some cases, or people who found themselves stranded, people also apatrides to have a chance to go on with a single travel to continue their life. It's a very key issue also for family reunification. It's very often used also to bring back children to their parents. And for all of those reasons, I would really encourage its use. In terms of identity, I listened to your presentation very attentively before. For us, clearly, the responsibility of attesting of the primary identity is the states, the one where the person is living from, the one where the person is going, that have this responsibility, and this is what they do. And I must say, over the last 2 decades, I don't have to my attention any single case where we had a problem in terms of identity. So I do understand all the risks, but also if we look at the reality on the thousands of people, at least to my knowledge, this is not a case that we had in the last decades. Historically, we had them after the Second World War, but over the last decades, this is not happening, and the way we centralize data also minimizes these risks. With that, I'm even in advance, and this will leave more time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for a very informative presentation, and thanks again for being with Inside Time. As you say, that will leave plenty of time for questions, so please get thinking. We would really welcome some interesting questions at the end of the presentations. I was present at NTWG some time ago when ICRC came to present the idea that they wanted to upgrade the security of the document and the process. Believe you me, the document that they replaced did need replacing, but I think they've done a fantastic job. And to be able to issue a document like that in the challenging circumstances that Pierre's just been talking about is a real success story. It really is. So I congratulate him and his team for what they've done there. Our final presenter this afternoon is Carolina Dulin. She's a legal officer in the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and provides guidance and support to UNHCR field operations on travel documents for refugees and stateless persons. She's worked for UNHCR for 12 years, including most recently in Sudan, Ethiopia and Lebanon. So I welcome Carolina to the floor.
Thank you so much, Tony, for this kind introduction. And thank you so much to ICAO for having invited UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, to speak on this panel today. The topic of this year's symposium, as we heard this morning, is the streamlining of border controls. In order to do this, we must ensure that all individuals have, in fact, access to travel documents, and that these documents are in line with international standards. That requires a focus not only on no country left behind, as Pierre mentioned earlier, but also not leaving any individuals or groups behind. I'm here today to represent two groups which are at particular risk of exactly that, of being left behind, and who are already, in very many countries, left out of a broader development in terms of travel documents. These two groups are refugees, that is, persons who have fled violence, war, and prosecution in their home country, and stateless persons, that is, persons who are not considered as citizens of any state. We must, in UNHCR's view, do all that we can to ensure that these particularly vulnerable groups are not left behind, as travel documents and technologies for border control globally become more and more advanced. This is not only in the interest of the individuals concerned, but also in the interest of states, the states that are hosting them and the states that are receiving them for travel purposes. More streamlined border controls require that all those traveling, regardless of their legal status in a country, have travel documentation that is secure and confirmed with international standards. This ensures not only mutual recognition of travel documentation between states, but also enhanced efficiency and security for all. So what are these travel documents for refugees and stateless persons? I've shown two particular photos on the screen. The first one is the Nansen passport that was issued in the 1920s, almost 100 years ago, based on the tradition of Fridtjof Nansen, who was the first High Commissioner for Refugees. The second one, to the right, is a more modern form of this, which has basically the same security features as a national passport. These are travel documents which are issued in accordance with the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1954 Statelessness Convention, so-called convention travel documents. However, there is one very important difference between national passports and travel documents issued to refugees and stateless persons. That is, that while national passports are issued by the state of your nationality, travel documents for refugees and stateless persons are issued by the state in which they are hosted or are residing. This means that there is an obligation of states parties to the conventions not only to issue travel documents to their own citizens, but also to refugees and stateless persons that are hosted on their territory. The reasons behind this is quite logical. Refugees are by definition people who are fleeing from persecution and violence in their own country. They can therefore normally not seek a passport from the authorities of that very country without putting themselves in harm's way. Stateless persons, on the other side, are not considered citizens of any state and therefore have no state to turn to obtain a national passport. Basically, refugees and stateless persons use travel documents for the same purposes as you and I: to travel to visit family, seek educational opportunity, for work, etc., etc. But importantly, refugee travel documents are also used for resettlement to third countries, such as, for example, the Syrian refugees who have been resettled or are getting private sponsorships right here in Canada. This supports international solidarity and burden sharing in the face of one of the worst refugee crises we have had since the Second World War. The documents are also used for humanitarian evacuations and medical evacuations. Finally, refugee travel documents promote safe and regular movement of persons. As in UNHCR's experience, refugees who do not have access to such documents often travel illegally across very dangerous land and sea borders, including through the use of human smugglers and traffickers who exploit and abuse their very desperate situation and put their lives at risk. The ability to travel abroad also strengthens refugees' self-reliance and resilience, their ability to lead more independent, stable, and normal lives. So, what are the technical standards for such documents? ICAO standards require travel documents for refugees and stateless persons to be machine-readable in accordance with document 9303 in the same way as national passports. To support states in their efforts to abide by this standard, ICAO and UNHCR have jointly issued a guide on machine-readable convention travel documents, which you see pictured on the screen. And this guide is also available for free on both of our websites. In terms of implementation, as of today, only 1 out of 5 of the world's refugees have access to travel documents that are issued in line with international standards. And in as many as 41% do not have access to any travel documents at all issued from their host state. In some states, this gap is filled by UNHCR, who in 29 states are currently supporting the state with printed booklets for issuance to refugees and stateless persons. These booklets are, however, handwritten, they're not machine-readable, and therefore not up to today's standards. Refugees may also, as a last resort, benefit from the ICRC emergency travel document, which Pierre has presented to us, but this is intended as a one-way travel document and therefore cannot be used for all purposes. For example, if a refugee obtains a scholarship and educational opportunities abroad, it's not the suitable travel document. There is therefore a significant gap in implementation between the theoretical standards and the actual compliance at country level. With almost 6.9 million refugees being left behind and being unable to seek travel opportunities for family visits, education, and etc. The very thing that we take for granted with our national passports. While UNHCR has seen a steady increase in states issuing machine-readable travel documents to refugees and stateless persons, there are only 73 states that today issue these in line with international standards for refugees and 31 for stateless persons. So 3 quick points in terms of a conclusion. UNHCR would like to strongly encourage and remind all states who do not yet issue machine-readable travel documents to refugees and stateless persons to do so, and to do so in line with the ICAO standard. Secondly, we would also like to encourage states to integrate travel documents for refugees and stateless persons into their national tendering and procurement procedures for national passports. This is seen as a good practice in many countries in the world, which ensures both economies of scale and long-term sustainability. Thirdly, UNHCR stands ready to support states on this important issue, including through the provision of material support as well as technical guidance in cooperation with ICAO. By ensuring the inclusion of refugees and stateless persons into existing systems for travel documents, we can make sure to keep on the promise to leave no one behind. This will also contribute to streamlining border controls, which are safe, effective, and accessible to all. Also finishing 2 minutes ahead of time, so room for questions. Thank you.
If it does.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolina. Again, a fascinating topic, and I think it's a very worthy subject that we should be talking about. And as somebody who has worked within tendering processes and worked within a company that manufactures passports, I would urge those member states here present to seriously take on board what she has said about incorporating the refugee and the stateless booklets within your tendering process. The economies of scale are really important. These are not high volume documents, and if you seek to have them produced as a standalone document, it's going to cost you a lot more money than having them produced alongside your national passport. So I really would urge you to take that point on board. Right. Time for questions. All our presenters have done a fantastic job in keeping within their time, so we have plenty of time for questions. You've all had good notice that I'm going to ask for them, so please, do we have any questions? Okay, we've got one back towards the back of the room. Have we got anybody running around with a microphone?
I have one.
Do that. Okay, right, thank you. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for some very interesting presentations, Ulrich and from the UN Office of Counterterrorism. I was wondering if the colleagues from ICRC and UNHCR could maybe speak to the specific issue of the children of foreign terrorist fighters born in ISIL-controlled areas, where of course there's absolutely no feeder documents and in some cases no nationality, parents may be dead. How do you deal with these kind of issues in terms of the documents that will be required for these persons to travel, some of which are stuck in Iraq and Syria? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for the question. You may know that the ICRC, beside working on family reunification travel document, is also working very closely when it comes to a situation of conflict with different categories of people, including families of foreign fighters. In this regard, we do have contact with many countries to try to find solutions that bring together the security concern that the country might have, but also the humanity that is needed, and the fact that solutions need to be found that integrate those people back into society. And I think there, the question then of travel is a key question. In that kind of case, we would not be the one establishing the identity of any person. We would really ask the authority to do everything they can to establish this identity. So we would advocate very clearly and very strongly that this must be the case, that the result cannot be to create more people without documentation, without a country of origin. And in most of those cases, it is feasible to trace back a country of origin. And then what we might do on request of the concerned authorities, but once again, this is on request of the concerned authorities, is issue a travel document if it need be so to allow for a given journey. But once again, those journeys for which we issue document are journeys that have been pre-approved by the given state, the departure one and the receiving one. So in no way is it that we would have a document and then try to send someone abroad without having authorities on all the stage of the travel, not only informed, but pre-agreeing, having pre-issued all the visa. The difficult part in that precise case is actually not the travel document. The precise difficulty is all the rest before, to make sure that the identity has been agreed upon and that the state have agreed to retake their citizen, incorporate them into then a program that would allow their reintegration in society. And this is really something that we are concretely very closely working on with the concerned state in that precise case. So that indeed is something we follow, and hopefully most of those families will find a solution which once again manages security concern on the one hand, which are legitimate, but on the other hand also show humanity and also show that there is a solution for the long term. if I may, what we are afraid of is that too much stigmatization, too much restriction, in the end will only amplify the problem. So if you don't have a way to manage both security and humanity and not see one against the other, but see the two as very complementarity for a better future, that then you actually delay a problem and make it worse if you only stigmatize and you only impede those people to return where they come from.
Thank you, Pierre. Carolina, have you anything you want to add on that?
No, I think Pierre actually responded to this perfectly. Just to reiterate the point that it is really up to state authorities to verify identity and, if needed, issue travel documents. And in this case also that UNHCR and other humanitarian agencies are really looking to and advocating towards state to take on the responsibility to for their own citizens, even when they are abroad and even when there are specific security concerns. Just to highlight one additional point in terms of the risk of statelessness also for some of these populations, if they're either born without birth certificates or they're given birth certificates that are not recognized by other entities. Let's just put it that way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions out there? Come on, somebody must have a question. Right at the back there on the right-hand side. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned about the refugees and the stateless persons, and then you mentioned about people traveling with smugglers that not necessarily are fleeing for conflict, but just are chasing a dream. How would you categorize this last group?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking about people who are on the move, chasing a dream, as you say, but not necessarily falling within the refugee definition or a statelessness definition in legal terms. If that's what you're referring to, I mean, mobility is clearly one of the mega trends of today, no? And there are many reasons why people would move. I think flight from war, persecution and violence would qualify you as a refugee, while a lot of other people are moving for other reasons. They could be migrants and they could be in very similar situations as refugees, very often using the same flights of travel, very often being exposed to some of the same risks and vulnerabilities as refugees, but without fulfilling a refugee definition.
If I might, there is one specific case among the 2,000 documents we issued this year. There is quite a number that are linked to people who were stranded in Libya, who were detained in Libya, and then were relocated elsewhere. And here you might have people who, from the beginning, were fleeing conflict and would fall within the convention. You might also have people who originally were not falling into the definition of the convention, but who went through such hardship and such situation that their return back home is extremely difficult. And if you imagine, to be a bit blunt and concrete, a woman going out of a very conservative area in a country and having then for weeks and months being raped in a place, you cannot send her back like that to her community. There you also have to have consideration where there are cases where people who might not have left the country as a primary reason because of conflict, but through their journey came across such situation that indeed humanitarian situation need to be found to allow a solution. And there, at least for this year, we have quite a lot of the travel documents that were issued for those type of cases.
Thank you once again, both of you. Okay, we have time for just one more question if there are any out there. I can't see any hands raised. In that case, I think we'll call it a day, and I'd just like to thank everybody. Sometimes at this time of day, the numbers start to dwindle, and I think it shows the appreciation of the presenters this afternoon that we still have a full complement. So thank you very much, and can we have a hand for our presenters? Thank you.
And again, a hand for the moderator. Well done, Tony, and well done, panel. Well, in just a few minutes, we will enjoy a well-deserved reception. It is brought to us by SICPA, and to make the presentation on behalf of the organization is Catherine Fanghauser. She is the Business Development Director. I'm so happy to have her back. Every year she comes up with innovations, surprises, exciting news about her products and services and so on. So, Catherine, what have you in store for us today?
I love you. So thank you very much, Denis, for putting me the pressure. I appreciate very much. So, good morning, ladies. Good afternoon, sorry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have the privilege to close this first day conference session. My speech will be more a kind of list of raised questions, starting from the title. Digital or not digital, is that the real questions? My speech is divided in 5 main chapters. The first one is, in order to follow the identity trends, shall we do an evolution or perform a revolution? But what exactly is digital identity? In the near future, shall we use document or mobile phone? And how I can improve the control of ID in motion? And of course, the conclusion. The first question is for you. What is the common feature in between these people on this slide? You have a businesswoman, a traveler, a passenger, refugees, or a businessman. Do you have any clue? Any suggestions? No? They all deserve a trusted identity, and they all need to prove it, regardless the situation or the condition in which they are. We are not going to answer directly to this question. We're more going back to the basis, to the definition of identity as it has been recently stated. Identity is a collective set of distinct personal and physical features, namely the biographic and the biometric data. The two next words are very important for the digital world. Data and qualities that enable, sorry, I forgot to change. Data or qualities that enable a person to be definitely identified from others. Traditionally, our identity system, our current identity system, is based on a physical interaction, face-to-face communication using a document. You go to the bank to open a bank account, you go to the post office, or you simply cross the border, you are going to give your document to the requester. The capacity to prove our identity is absolutely fundamental for our economic, social, and financial developments, including on the top of traveling to have access to critical services, such as, for example, education or healthcare. With the continuous expansion of internet-driven services, ongoing change in ID models, increasing distance between seller and purchaser, like for example in the case of a web purchase, speed of all transaction, as it is depicted here on this table, all these features show the limits of our current document or MRTD. Today, the transactions look more like a spaghetti plate, where the data or information are transferred using internet, using Bluetooth, or using near-field communication. And of course, it can be securely protected using blockchain technology. In this new configuration, GAFAM and telcos, with your permission, with your agreement, are collecting on a daily basis huge amount of your personal data. So in the near future, these people might become the leader in identity management, and in digital identity. Do we want this? But what exactly is digital identity? Again, we're going to go back to another definition. Digital identity is a collection of individual attributes that link a person with his or her online transaction. You have different types of digital identity providers. Depending if you are coming from the public sector, it can be a government entities. If you are coming from the private sector, you can be, for example, a commercial bank. And even if you have a mixture in between end-to-end identity system, is kind of mixture in between private and public sectors. Therefore, in order to meet this fourth industrial revolution, we need to have something, device, a new solution, which is seamlessly integrated the following feature: multi-purpose usage, instant identity check, robustness against identity theft, and very important, to have an incremental and ubiquitous remote credential system. To meet this conflicting condition, ICAO understood the urgency of studying a new alternative to the traditional passport. And they established in 2016, with the help of the New Technology Working Group, they create what we call the DTC. This is an acronym for Digital Travel Credentials, where the identity data can be carried into a cell phone or can be stored into the cloud. Therefore, we are not talking anymore about an eMRTD, an electronic MRTD, but about an iMRTD, I standing for interactive. We know that today everything is going faster. Despite this, we know as well that standardization, harmonization is taking a long time. We have examples from the past. For example, the incorporation of the MRZ into the passport, or the harmonization of biometry. Therefore, the next challenge is how I can render the current solution, which is document-centric, how I can incorporate the credentials or dynamic data. Oops. Let's take in the eMRTD. I can simply maybe add the credential to the chip, to the electronic component of this machine-readable travel document. Unfortunately, we know that with the current solution, it's not possible at all. Why? Because the chip is locked after the personalization process. So this solution is not an option anymore. The alternative is to add a 2D barcode to the passport. When we can add a 2D barcode to the passport only during two processes: when you cross the border, when you have an admission stamp, or when you are using or you are issuing a visa. So now we are not talking anymore about a 2D barcode. We are talking more about a secure legal ID token. So you have your 2D barcode where you embed it into it, biographic data, credentials, and you digitally sign these data metrics. The secure legal ID token can be used, for example, at the post-clearance level, when you go to the hotel. You know that the hotel keeper, after welcoming you in his resort, the first thing that he's going to ask you before your credit card is going to ask you your passport. In 80% of the time, what he's going to do simply is going to copy your bio page and pile up all these documents and give to these, the governmental stakeholders. This is really a burden. So instead of doing this, imagine that he's going to take his mobile phone with a dedicated application, he's going to flash the code and then send the information to the Ministry of Interior or to the Ministry of Immigration. Now, how we can improve the control of ID in motion? I just remind you now that we have this token which comprise biographic data, credential, and a digital signature. The ultimate link, in order to be sure that the document bearer is the owner of the document, is to add a biometric layer. In this case, what we did, we add facial recognition. With the same ad that I described before, just flash the code, and on an offline mode, what I forgot to tell you before, on an offline mode, you are going to retrieve the information. And using the camera of your smartphone, you're going to take a selfie of the picture of the document holder. As a conclusion, and remember we asked one of the questions, shall we use in the near future the document or mobile phone? You know that to issue an EMRTD, you need to rely on the birth certificate, on the entrance of the supply chain to deliver passport, birth certificate or British document. It is exactly the same to have access to the digital world, except it's not birth certificates, it's EMRTD. Therefore, it's not the or, it's the and. The passport will remain, sorry, I forgot to change. The passport will remain the credential reference in the digital world. And I'm quite sure that you agree with me that being a grandma or grandmom for birth certificate is a paradox. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you will enjoy the cocktail party. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. Yes, the pressure was on, but you delivered. Merci beaucoup.